The scorching African sun beat down mercilessly, baking the earth into a cracked, unforgiving canvas. Dust devils danced in the distance, twisting columns of ochre against the hazy sky. In this crucible of life and death, a heart-stopping drama was unfolding, a primal struggle for survival that would test the very limits of instinct and empathy. A magnificent leopardess, known only as Shadow for her spectral grace and skill in vanishing, found herself utterly cornered. Her lithe, muscular body tensed, every nerve ending screaming danger. Behind her, nestled low in the thorny scrub, were her two impossibly vulnerable cubs, their spotted coats still too faint to offer true camouflage, their eyes wide with an innocent fear that mirrored her own. An impossible choice loomed, just 2 seconds away, forcing her to decide: claw the encroaching threat or shield her precious offspring. Into this tense tableau stepped Dr. Evelyn Reed, her brow perpetually furrowed by the relentless sun and the weight of her mission. An American wildlife biologist, Evelyn was a force of nature as formidable as the savanna itself. Her passion for big cat conservation, specifically the elusive and increasingly threatened leopards of this remote reserve, was not merely academic. It was a visceral, deeply personal commitment. Years ago, a similar ecological crisis had claimed a species she passionately studied, a loss that etched itself into her soul and fueled her unwavering dedication to preventing another. She moved through the landscape with a quiet reverence, her gaze scanning, analyzing, always searching for the delicate balance that held this wild world together. Every scratch on a tree, every disturbed patch of dust, told a story she was desperate to understand and protect. Alongside Evelyn was Ben Carter, an American photojournalist whose work had graced the pages of countless prestigious magazines. Ben was a master of capturing the raw, untamed beauty and the brutal, unforgiving struggles of African wildlife. He was initially more detached, his focus often narrowed to the perfect composition, the ideal light, the iconic shot that would tell 1,000 words. His camera, an extension of his own ambition, felt like a shield, allowing him to observe without fully immersing himself in the emotional tumult. He sought the truth through his lens, believing true impact came from objective documentation, a philosophy that would soon be profoundly challenged. The team had been tracking Shadow for days across the challenging terrain, a relentless pursuit under the relentless sun. The savanna, with its deceptive beauty, was a maze of dry riverbeds, ancient baobab trees, and thorny acacias that clawed at skin and fabric. Their objective was to monitor Shadow's movements, assess her health, and document the early days of her new litter. Shadow was famed for her elusiveness, a ghostly presence that appeared and disappeared with unnerving speed. Her recent emergence with cubs had been a rare gift, offering invaluable insight into the species' reproductive patterns. Yet, this gift now felt like a curse. Following faint paw prints, the team's modified safari vehicle had inadvertently driven Shadow and her cubs into a natural yet deadly trap. A towering granite outcrop, its dark face gleaming under the harsh light, formed an impenetrable wall on one side. On the other, a dense thicket of wait-a-bit thorns, true to their name, created an equally insurmountable barrier. The passage behind them had closed up due to a recent minor rockfall, unnoticed in their focused pursuit. Now Shadow, the master of escape, found herself with absolutely no route out. Her golden eyes, usually full of cunning and silent power, now held a glint of desperation. If you're fascinated by wildlife and incredible survival stories, hit that subscribe button. The air, already thick with the scent of sun-baked earth and dry savanna grass, now carried another, more ominous aroma. Smoke. A rapidly approaching brush fire, ignited by a lightning strike barely an hour prior, was now closing in on their precarious position. A fiery guillotine descending upon Shadow and her unsuspecting cubs. What started as an unpredictable, distant threat had escalated with terrifying speed, fueled by the relentless African winds and the tinder-dry vegetation. Each gust seemed to push the inferno closer, painting the horizon with a lurid orange glow that pulsed with a malevolent life of its own. Dr. Evelyn Reed felt an icy grip of panic constricting her chest, a direct physical manifestation of the immense pressure and overwhelming guilt that now threatened to consume her. Every strategic decision, every painstaking tracker's step that had led them to this location, now felt like a lead weight dragging her down. She had inadvertently led Shadow, this magnificent creature she had sworn to protect, directly into a death trap. Her scientific objectivity, usually her steadfast anchor, was obliterated by a deep personal empathy that resonated with an almost unbearable intensity. The flicker of the fire in the distance seemed to ignite the embers of a past loss she had experienced, a moment of helplessness years ago when a similar environmental catastrophe had claimed a species she had dedicated years to studying. The memory was a fresh wound, twisting the knife of her present anguish. She had to save Shadow. Failure was not an option she could bear again. Ben Carter, initially engrossed in the pursuit of the perfect dramatic shot, found his professional detachment crumbling with each crackle of the approaching flames. The distant roar of the fire was no longer just background noise for his compelling narrative. It was a visceral threat. His primary goal had always been to document, to capture the raw, untamed beauty of Africa. But this unfolding tragedy was different. The suffering felt too immediate, too tangible. The camera in his hands, usually a tool of objective observation, now felt heavy, almost accusatory. He was torn between his professional duty to document this unprecedented event and a growing, urgent sense of responsibility that gnawed at his conscience. Could he merely stand by, an impartial witness to a catastrophe he had, in a small way, contributed to by driving the leopardess into this corner? The fire, now a roaring beast, created a wall of smoke and suffocating heat that drastically reduced visibility, turning the once vibrant savanna into a hazy, hellish landscape. Panic rippled through the animal kingdom. Antelope scattered, birds cried out, and a palpable fear permeated the very air. Shadow, now aware of the encroaching inferno, began to pace nervously, her usually calm demeanor replaced by an agitated flick of her tail and a low growl that rumbled deep in her chest. Her cubs, huddled closer to her, sensed her distress, their small bodies trembling. Dr. Reed and her team, fueled by a surge of desperate energy, began frantic attempts at immediate intervention. They tried to create a fire break, using what rudimentary tools they had to clear a narrow strip of grass, hoping to slow the fire's progress. They scanned the terrain for any alternative escape route for Shadow, shouting over the increasing roar of the flames, pointing to potential gaps in the rocky outcrop. But the speed and intensity of the fire rendered their efforts futile. The flames leaped over their hastily cleared lines, consuming everything in their path with terrifying efficiency. Ben, his earlier conflict momentarily forgotten in the face of the overwhelming threat, documented their desperate, almost pathetic attempts, his lens capturing the futility and the encroaching horror. Each click of his shutter felt like a mournful beat in a terrifying symphony of destruction. The acrid scent of burning brush intensified, a suffocating blanket descending upon the already parched landscape. Shadow's sleek, muscular form, became a blur of frantic energy, a dark specter against the ominous orange glow that now dominated the horizon. Her low growls were no longer just warnings. They were guttural pleas, expressions of pure, unadulterated terror. Her cubs, tiny bundles of spotted fur, whimpered softly, pressing themselves against her legs, their small eyes wide with fear as they huddled in the diminishing sliver of relative safety. The wind, once a mere whisper, now howled like a banshee, whipping embers into fiery tornadoes that danced ever closer to their precarious refuge. The rock face behind Shadow, which had offered a semblance of protection, now felt like an unyielding wall, trapping them. Then, with a sickening rumble that vibrated through the very ground beneath their feet, a section of the rocky outcrop gave way. Not a massive collapse, but enough to send a cascade of loose boulders and smaller stones tumbling down, effectively blocking the narrow, almost invisible crevice Dr. Reed had, moments earlier, identified as a potential, albeit desperate, escape route. Dust plumed into the smoke-filled air, momentarily obscuring the leopardess and her young. The roar of the fire seemed to merge with the unsettling groan of the earth, creating a cacophony of impending doom. Now, the cul-de-sac was even tighter, the options for Shadow even fewer. The fire was an inferno closing in from one side, a roaring, consuming entity, while the human team, a silent, watchful presence, stood on the other, their vehicles a menacing outline against the fiery backdrop. Shadow let out a series of short, sharp snarls, a primal call of distress and defiance. Her head swiveled frantically, assessing the inferno, then the humans, then back to her trembling offspring. Her tail lashed, a whip of desperation. The impossible choice was no longer a theoretical dilemma. It was a horrifying reality unfolding in real time. Her instinct, honed over generations of survival in this brutal land, screamed at her. Protect her cubs, at all costs. But from what? The fire that threatened to engulf them, or the strange bipedal creatures whose presence had inadvertently cornered them? Ben, his camera now a heavy, almost sentient extension of his arm, continued to capture every raw, unfiltered moment. The flickering light from the inferno painted Shadow's face in stark contrasts, highlighting the intense, almost human-like anguish in her eyes. He zoomed in, framing her perfectly, aware that he was witnessing something extraordinary, yet deeply unsettling. The ethical dilemma, which had been a low hum in the back of his mind, now erupted into a deafening roar. Was he merely an observer, a documentarian of tragedy? Or was there a line, a point at which the lens must drop and human intervention must begin? The conflict tore at him, a visceral ache in his chest. He saw not just a wild animal, but a mother facing an unimaginable choice. Dr. Reed, meanwhile, moved with a frantic, desperate energy, her binoculars pressed to her eyes as she scanned every inch of the remaining terrain. Her mind raced, analyzing angles, wind direction, the speed of the fire's advance. The rock slide had eliminated their most remote possibility. Now, the only path that remained was a direct confrontation with the fire, or a push through the human presence. Her heart pounded, a drum solo of anxiety. She knew the territory better than anyone, but even her vast knowledge seemed inadequate against the sheer, overwhelming power of nature unleashed. She was even, in her desperation, considering a mad dash, a diversion, anything that might draw the fire's immediate attention away, even if it meant putting her own life in unimaginable peril. The lives of Shadow and her tiny cubs now rested on a knife's edge, and Dr. Reed felt the crushing weight of that responsibility. The roar of the encroaching fire intensified, a monstrous chorus that drowned out all other sounds in the savannah. The air, heavy with the acrid scent of burning vegetation, thickened with smoke, making every breath a shallow struggle. Shadow, her powerful body tense and coiled, stood her ground, a living statue of fierce maternal protection. Her eyes, luminous in the smoke-hazed twilight, darted between the wall of flame advancing from one side and the silent, imposing figures of the human team on the other. Each gaze was a flicker of raw instinct, a desperate calculation of threat. The heat licked at her fur, an infernal breath against her flanks, urging her to move, to flee, to choose. But where? What was the lesser of two evils? With only 2 agonizing seconds to react, Shadow was thrust into an impossible scenario. Her primal instincts screamed at her, pulling her in conflicting, terrifying directions. Should she lash out at the perceived threat of the humans, clearing a path through them as her ancestors would have done in a different kind of confrontation? The urge to bare her teeth, to launch herself forward in a blur of claws and fury, was potent, etched deep into her genetic code. Or should she curl her body around her tiny, vulnerable cubs, using her own flesh and blood as a living shield against the consuming inferno? Every fiber of her being was a battlefield, a silent scream of a mother cornered, facing an existential choice where every option promised an unbearable cost. Through the powerful lens of his camera, Ben captured the raw, primal terror and unwavering determination etched onto Shadow's face. The flickering light from the inferno danced in her eyes, transforming them into pools of molten gold, reflecting the inferno around her and the hell within. He saw the subtle tremor in her muscles, the barely perceptible shift in her weight, indicators of a massive internal struggle. This wasn't merely an animal. This was a mother facing the ultimate test. He knew, with chilling certainty, that the image he was about to capture would transcend mere photography. It would be iconic, a testament to the brutal beauty of survival and the selfless, fierce love of a creature pushed to the absolute edge. He felt a profound reverence, a suffocating responsibility to bear witness to this moment, however agonizing it might be. Dr. Reed, her face streaked with soot and sweat, pressed forward, her voice raw, a desperate plea attempting to pierce the cacophony. "Shadow, we're not a threat. Go. Move." Her words were swallowed by the wind and the roar of the fire, utterly incomprehensible to the leopardess. She stretched out a hand, a gesture of peace, of understanding. But the chaos, the smoke, the sheer overwhelming danger made any nuanced communication utterly impossible. The gap between species, usually a bridgeable chasm in her conservation work, now felt like an insurmountable canyon. She yearned to convey their intentions, to tell Shadow that they were there to help, not harm, but all that radiated from their presence was an ambiguous, potentially menacing interruption to the leopardess's desperate calculations. The camera, for a heart-stopping moment, focused on the small, helpless cubs. They were barely more than bundles of spotted fur, trembling and confused, pressing themselves against their mother's powerful legs. Their wide, innocent eyes reflected the orange glow of the fire, utterly unaware of the impossible burden on their mother's shoulders. One cub let out a tiny, plaintive whimper, a sound so small yet so profoundly impactful, amplifying the emotional weight of Shadow's impossible situation. Their vulnerability was a stark, almost unbearable contrast to the raging inferno and the formidable strength of their mother. It was for them, for these precious, fragile lives, that Shadow was about to make her terrible, defining choice. The air crackled with anticipation, every second stretching into an eternity. The air crackled with the heat of the approaching inferno, thick with the acrid scent of burning brush and the metallic tang of fear. Time seemed to warp, stretching into an agonizing eternity as Shadow, the magnificent leopardess, processed the terrifying calculus of her predicament. The fire roared, a hungry beast devouring everything in its path, and the humans, those perplexing two-legged giants, stood motionless, their intent ambiguous. Her cubs, tiny bundles of spotted vulnerability, whimpered behind her, pressing against her powerful flanks. It was in that sliver of a second, that impossible pause between certain destruction and an unknown future, that Shadow made her choice. Instead of turning her fury on the humans, instead of lashing out at the perceived threat that had inadvertently cornered her, she performed an act of profound, primal selflessness. With a guttural growl that was more lament than aggression, she whirled around, positioning her muscular body between her trembling cubs and the advancing wall of flame. Her broad back, her very being, became a shield. She flattened herself, her head low, eyes fixed not on the encroaching fire, but on her offspring, as if her gaze alone could protect them. She was exposing herself, making herself the primary target, her sleek coat now dangerously close to the searing heat, absorbing the onslaught meant for her vulnerable young. It was a silent, powerful testament to maternal love, a raw, unfiltered act of sacrifice. Ben, his finger hovering over the shutter release, witnessed this incredible moment. For a split second, his professional detachment shattered. The camera became a burden, sliding slightly in his grip as he instinctively lowered it, his mind reeling. This wasn't merely a picture, it was an emotional earthquake. The sheer, unadulterated heroism of Shadow's action, the instinctive willingness to give everything for her young, hit him with the force of a physical blow. He felt a profound sense of awe, a deep, unsettling reverence that transcended his role as a photojournalist. Then, with a gasp, he snapped back to reality, realizing the magnitude of what he was seeing. His camera flew back up, clicking furiously, capturing the iconic, heart-wrenching scene. A mother, utterly exposed, shielding her future from the fire. This image, he knew, would forever define his career, not just for its technical brilliance, but for the soul-stirring story it told. Dr. Reed, immobilized for a fraction of a second by the sheer breathtaking courage of the leopardess, felt a surge of raw determination. Shadow's selfless act had galvanized her. Any doubt, any lingering question about their intervention vanished. They simply could not stand by and let such bravery be extinguished. "Now!" she screamed, her voice cracking with urgency as she gestured wildly. "We have to move. Get the tarps, anything." Her scientific objectivity had entirely dissolved, replaced by an overwhelming protective instinct mirroring Shadow's own. The entire team, spurred by Dr. Reed's command and the potent image of Shadow's sacrifice, sprang into action. The previously frozen tableau of humans and leopardess dissolved into a flurry of desperate, coordinated movement. They weren't just observing anymore. They were participants in a desperate struggle for survival. Two rangers immediately grabbed the heavy, fire-resistant tarpaulins they carried for emergencies, unfolding them with practiced speed. Another began frantically pulling away dry brush and fallen branches, attempting to create a makeshift firebreak, however futile it might seem against the raging inferno. They used their shovels, their bare hands, anything they could find, to clear a narrow, desperate line in the path of the encroaching flames, hoping to divert the most intense heat, to buy even a few precious seconds. Ben, surprisingly, wasn't just filming. He dropped his heavy camera, letting it dangle by its strap, and grabbed a large, sturdy fallen branch. He began to beat at the ground, helping the others clear debris, his powerful frame now an active part of the desperate effort. The transformation was complete. The detached observer, the man driven by the perfect shot, was gone. In his place was a human being, consumed by the simple, undeniable need to help. He swung the branch with surprising force, his gaze no longer fixed solely on the lens, but on the brave, cornered mother and her small, fragile cubs. The team's desperate, coordinated efforts, fueled by Shadow's extraordinary act of maternal sacrifice, created a minute but crucial disruption in the fire's relentless advance. The makeshift barrier of hastily piled rocks and damp earth, combined with the focused spray from their limited water reserves, momentarily diverted the most intense heat and flames away from the immediate area where Shadow cradled her cubs. It was a flimsy, precarious shield, but in that moment, it was enough. Dr. Reed, her eyes scanning the chaos with a renewed intensity, suddenly noticed something previously obscured. The tremor from the rock slide, disastrous moments before, had paradoxically created a sliver of hope. A small, almost invisible passage through the rocky outcrop, previously completely blocked, was now partially exposed. A dark fissure in the scorched rock face, made visible by the bizarre, dancing light of the inferno. It was barely wide enough for a leopard, and certainly not without significant risk of further collapse or burns, but it was an opening. There, Dr. Reed's voice, hoarse with smoke and adrenaline, cut through the roar of the fire. She pointed frantically with a gloved hand towards the dark crack. "Ben, get your light. We have to guide her." Without a moment's hesitation, she began to move, her steps sure-footed even on the unstable, heating ground, risking burns and injury, driven by an almost irrational hope. The team followed, a surge of collective determination propelling them forward. The air shimmered with heat, singeing their hair and clothes, but they pressed on, a human chain of desperate rescuers. The daring rescue attempt was fraught with peril. As they cautiously approached the opening, Dr. Reed tried to draw Shadow's attention, making soft, reassuring clicks and murmurs, a desperate attempt to bridge the chasm of instinct and fear. But Shadow, though facing an even greater immediate threat from the fire, remained profoundly wary. Her golden eyes, already narrowed against the smoke and heat, flickered between the advancing flames and the slowly approaching humans. Her primal instincts screamed caution. These bipedal figures had, after all, been part of the problem, however inadvertently. Every movement the team made, every whispered instruction, seemed to heighten her distrust, making the guidance incredibly difficult. She snarled low in her throat, a soft, vibrating warning that resonated deep within the chest. It was then that Ben's crucial role became undeniable. Dropping his camera, he snatched a powerful tactical flashlight from his pack, its beam cutting a sharp, almost solid path through the smoke and gloom. He directed the intense light not at Shadow, but towards the narrow passage, creating a beacon, a tunnel of illuminated safety. He then used the light as a distraction, momentarily sweeping it across the encroaching flames, drawing the fire's attention away from the immediate escape route, creating a momentary, visual break in the overwhelming fiery chaos. More surprisingly, he began to speak, his voice calm and steady, despite the pandemonium. He wasn't speaking to Shadow, but to the team, his words a rhythmic, soothing reassurance, a surprising anchor in the rising tide of panic. "Stay low, everyone. Keep moving. Just a little further, Shadow. You can do this." His words, though not understood by the leopardess, seemed to have a calming effect on the frantic humans, allowing them to maintain their focus. Shadow, her body a coiled spring of tension, watched the illuminated passage. The fire licked closer, its heat an unbearable torment. The humans, strangely, were not attacking but pointing, urging. The beam of light seemed to carve a path, an invitation. After a prolonged, agonizing moment of hesitation, her instincts for survival and for her cub's safety finally outweighed her deep-seated wariness of humans. With a low growl, she nudged her smallest cub forward, then the other, guiding them towards the flickering light. They squeezed through the narrow opening, their sleek bodies almost scraping the rock. Dr. Reed let out a choked gasp of relief. But success was not without cost. As the last cub disappeared into the passage, a small, loose rock, dislodged by the frantic movement and fire's tremors, tumbled down. It struck one of the team members, a young field assistant named Mark, on the arm. He cried out, a sharp, choked sound, but quickly stifled it, his eyes still fixed on the passage, knowing that the real victory was Shadow's escape. A dark bruise was already blooming on his forearm, a painful, tangible reminder of the day's harrowing events. The immediate danger from the roaring fire had finally receded, leaving behind a landscape scarred but not entirely consumed. Shadow and her two cubs, though still visibly shaken, found themselves in a relatively untouched patch of savanna, a small oasis amidst the smoldering aftermath. The air, though still carrying the acrid scent of smoke, was cooler, allowing for deeper breaths. They were safe, for now. Back at the edge of the burnt area, Dr. Reed and her team collapsed, their bodies heavy with exhaustion, their minds reeling from the adrenaline-fueled ordeal. Mark cradled his injured arm, wincing slightly, but a wide, relieved grin stretched across his soot-smudged face. The gravity of what they had just experienced began to sink in, a wave of profound relief washing over them all. Ben, despite the chaos, had managed to capture the raw emotions of the team, the fear, the desperation, the sheer relief. His lens had become a silent observer, documenting not just the external events, but the internal turmoil and ultimate triumph of human and animal survival. Dr. Reed, wiping streaks of ash and sweat from her forehead, leaned against a dusty research vehicle, her gaze fixed on the distant, shadowy figures of Shadow and her cubs. Her heart swelled with an overwhelming sense of awe and profound respect. She reflected on the incredible visceral strength of maternal instinct, a force so powerful it could compel a creature to face an inferno. The delicate, often brutal balance between human intervention and natural processes had been tested to its limits today. She had wrestled with her conscience, her scientific objectivity constantly challenged by a deep-seated empathy for the animals she studied. Yet, in that crucible of fire and fear, the lines had blurred, and a shared will to survive had emerged. Her respect for Shadow, already considerable, had deepened into something akin to reverence. This wasn't merely a research subject anymore. It was a testament to life's fierce tenacity. For Ben, the photojournalist, the transformation was undeniable. He ran a hand through his soot-stained hair, his usual detached professionalism replaced by a newfound intensity in his eyes. He had witnessed a primal act of selfless love, an animal's raw courage that transcended species. His photographs, he realized, were no longer just about capturing stunning images for a portfolio. They were about telling a story of survival against impossible odds, of empathy forging unexpected connections, and of the profound, often challenging bond between humanity and the wild. He felt a deeper purpose stirring within him, a realization that his craft could be a powerful tool for advocacy, for giving a voice to the voiceless. The perfect shot now meant something entirely different. It meant capturing the soul of a moment, the essence of life's struggle and beauty. As the sun began its descent, casting long orange shadows across the scarred landscape, Shadow turned, her magnificent head held high. Her golden eyes, still wary, met Dr. Reed's across the expanse. There was no aggression, no fear, not in that precise moment. Instead, there was a glimmer of something more, something unreadable yet undeniably present. Perhaps a flicker of recognition, a momentary truce, an unspoken acknowledgement of shared experience. It was a fleeting connection, a fragile understanding forged in the crucible of fire, a silent testament to the extraordinary events of the day. The wild remained wild, but for a brief instant, a bridge had been built, held together by courage and compassion. With Shadow and her cubs now safely beyond the immediate inferno, the team, exhausted but exhilarated, made their way back to camp. The air still hung heavy with the acrid scent of smoke, a stark reminder of the peril they had collectively faced. Mark's arm throbbed, but his grimace was softened by a triumphant smile. A small price, he'd insisted, for such a profound success. Dr. Reed, her face streaked with soot and tears of relief, immediately began organizing the updated tracking data, ensuring Shadow's new, albeit temporary location was logged and monitored. The immediate crisis was averted, but the story of Shadow's incredible bravery, her selfless act of protecting her cubs against an unimaginable threat, began to spread like wildfire among the few who knew the full details. It wasn't just a tale of survival, it quickly became a symbol of resilience, a testament to the primal, unyielding power of maternal love in the face of absolute chaos. The harrowing experience solidified a crucial shift in the team's approach to conservation. Dr. Reed, driven by the raw emotion of witnessing Shadow's choice, became even more convinced of the need for an integrated strategy. New protocols were quickly implemented, emphasizing not just scientific rigor in data collection and tracking, but also a deeper, more empathetic understanding of the animal's behavior and their individual circumstances. They would strive to anticipate and mitigate such incidents, understanding that their presence, however well-intentioned, could inadvertently create dangerous situations. The ethical dilemmas of wildlife conservation, when to intervene, when to observe, and the fine line between protection and interference, became even more central to their discussions. It was a stark lesson in the interconnectedness of all life, and the immense responsibility that came with their mission. Ben, profoundly changed by the entire ordeal, found his purpose crystallized. His initial detachment, a professional armor he'd worn for years, had been utterly shattered by Shadow's self-sacrifice. He no longer sought merely the perfect image. He yearned to tell stories, to give voice to the voiceless, to inspire action. His photographs of Shadow shielding her cubs, of the team's frantic, smoke-filled efforts, and the quiet dignity of the leopardess in the aftermath, gained international recognition with astonishing speed. They weren't just award-winning pictures. They were poignant narratives that resonated deeply with viewers, raising unprecedented awareness and much-needed funds for conservation efforts across the continent. He began to dedicate his entire portfolio to wildlife conservation, forging an unbreakable partnership with researchers like Dr. Reed, his lens now a powerful advocacy tool. Dr. Reed, witnessing the tangible impact of Ben's work, felt a renewed, almost spiritual dedication to her own. The memory of Shadow's courage, the fierce love in her eyes, became an unwavering beacon, guiding her through the often frustrating bureaucracy and emotional toll of her work. She understood now, more profoundly than ever, that conservation wasn't just about preserving species. It was about protecting the inherent majesty and right to existence of every creature, understanding their stories, and fighting for their future. The bond she felt with the wild, forged in the crucible of fire and desperation, had tightened, becoming an intrinsic part of her very being. The video concludes with a powerful, lingering shot of Shadow, now months later, thriving with her growing cubs in a verdant, untouched corner of the reserve. Her eyes, still holding that ancient wildness, glance briefly towards the hidden camera, a flicker of something unreadable. Perhaps a memory, perhaps a simple acknowledgement of the shared space. It's a moment imbued with profound meaning, a silent testament to the extraordinary power of maternal love, the resilience of nature, and the capacity for humanity to learn, to grow, and to protect. The journey was fraught with danger, loss, and impossible choices, but it ultimately revealed the enduring spirit of survival and the nascent hope for a future where all life could truly flourish. The story of Shadow, the cornered leopardess, became a legend whispered around campfires and shared across continents, a timeless reminder of the delicate, beautiful dance between humanity and the wild.